watched the movie Eddie the Eagle? It's a fictionalized account of a real ski jumper who wasn't very good but made it to the Olympics. And in part of the movie, he's trying to qualify for the Olympics, and he goes to a competition in Germany. And when he gets to the table to check in, they give him all this paperwork to fill out, and he objects because he needs to go get to practicing. And the two guys sitting there say, "No, we do things here by the book. By the book." So he goes, he fills out all the paperwork, he eventually does his jump, and he comes up a little bit short, and he goes back to those same two guys, and he says, "I need to do another jump, because this is my last chance to qualify," and they say, "No, because we do things by the book." And when we say by the book, we mean that we follow the rules. We might say we follow the letter of the law. And as we think about rules, rules are important. We have laws, rules, we have customs, we have habits that are sort of expected of us in a particular culture. And all of those things are important. They're there to provide structure, to provide safety and security and order. And that was true in Jesus' day. He comes to the temple or the synagogue, and he's there, and this woman who's been bent over for 18 years with this evil spirit comes in. Jesus heals her. And if the saying, the way we say it, existed in the day, you can imagine the leader of the synagogue saying, "No, you can't do that, because here we do things by the book." And I wish he really would have said that, because Jesus could have then said, "Well, I think I wrote the book, and now I'm going to tell you how the book works." But that's his whole sense, is that it's not supposed to work on the Sabbath, and he wants to do things by the book because he's really trying to be faithful. And what we can learn in this interaction is Jesus tells him really no people come before the rules. And as Jesus gives him a different pattern for living, we can learn a few things from this interaction. First, we learn that often rules come from a very good place. Sometimes it's a gift, sometimes it's something bad that happened, but there's some reason that we've come up with a particular law or rule or cultural expectation. And often there was good motivation there. The people of Israel were given the law as a gift to help them live well together. And one of the bits of that was the Sabbath. It was a gift for them to say, don't work every day. That's not good for you. You should have a day where you rest in God's presence. And I think as Americans who live in a very busy, overworked culture, we can understand how Sabbath like that, of time to sit in God's presence, would be a gift. Well, they got that gift, and then over time they said, okay, well, what does that mean? And so then they start to create rules about what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. And now the gift is forgotten, and the rules are still there. And so part of what we learn from this is that it's easy to forget why and then just focus on the what of the rules and regulations and stand strong in those, losing the motive and the intent that was behind them. As the conversation continues, you see Jesus teaching us that people, though, are more important than rules. This woman has come and she cannot rest on the Sabbath because she's in pain. She never can rest. And for 18 years she hasn't been able to rest. And by this healing happening, what Jesus is really showing them is that Sabbath can include an opportunity for her to have rest. And so, not only can we lose sight of the original intent of what those rules came from, but sometimes we can use those very same rules against people rather than in favor of them. And so there's this idea of putting people first. Sometimes following those rules is how we put people first, but other times it may be that we have to work a little bit of a different way. The third thing that we can learn, though, is that these religious leaders are not wholly uniform in the way they decide what is work and what is not. Jesus calls them hypocrites because they've been picking and choosing. Teaching, which is work for some people, is not counted as work in the synagogue on that day. Healing people is, but taking care of your livestock is not, is what Jesus points out to them. And some of that livestock is probably what they raised for a profit. So they're working, and they're picking and choosing which things apply. Now, it would be easy for us to learn a religious lesson from these stories of this whole thing. That we can lose sight of the gift, that we can put people second instead of putting people first, and that sometimes we really pick and choose. It would be easy for us to just say, yep, as the church, we have done that. As the church, we have set up all kinds of rules and things along the way that have hurt people. I've been in places where no one is allowed to touch anything up here unless they have on like white gloves and they've gone through, all the proper training and they know just what movements to make. And that is to say then that there are other people that aren't allowed to be up there. And the church has done much worse things around categories of people for long periods of time that has brought a lot of hurt and pain. And so it would be easy to just hear this story and say, yep, as a church, we need to do better within the walls of this place at putting people first. And I think that's true. But if we stop there, we probably don't quite get where Jesus is really going entirely with this experience that he runs into with these people in the synagogue. In our day, we have federal laws, and we have international rules, we have local and state laws, we have Robert's Rules of Order, we've got customs that are unique. We've got all these different layers of things. Back in Jesus' day, they certainly had Roman law, and they had this Jewish law, but they didn't have like this separation of religion and everyday living that we tend to live with in our day. So Jesus isn't just talking about what's happening inside the synagogue. I think he's really talking about their pattern for the way they live every single day, all throughout their day. And if we hear what Jesus is then saying to us, that we are being given a pattern to put people first before rules, that ought to apply everywhere we go. Because we do very much the same things everywhere we go. We lose sight of the intent and the motive around whatever laws, rules, customs that we have. And we end up in that same place where we can just be focused on rules. And often that comes at the expense of people. Have you ever heard anybody say rules are rules? You're trying to get past something that's a struggle for you, and they look at you and they say, oh, there's nothing I can do. Rules are rules. Right? So they've lost sight of the gift and now focused on the rules. We also often don't put people before rules because we just want to make sure we're doing things right and we follow the rules, and sometimes that comes at the expense of other people. And we certainly pick and choose which rules we want to apply to us, even if that comes at the expense of other people. My first job of my first career required a great deal of travel. About 5 years into that, we had our oldest, and he was, for his first 5 months, I was on the road to a different city every week. And I know there are military people who give up way, way more time with their kids, but I just couldn't do it. And so I started to look for a job, but my company had an unwritten rule, right? So you go buy the book. The unwritten rule was if your travel is too much, talk to somebody, because we might be able to work it out. And so I said, okay. So I went and talked to my old career manager, and he said, well, maybe it's time to quit. And he actually helped me find a new job. I talked to my team lead on the project I was on and said, I can't keep doing this travel. And he said, okay, well, let me see if I can find part of our project that isn't traveling all the time. And so I did all of what they told me to do. Still, I was traveling. None of it was working out. So I go finally on a Monday. We flew in, ironically, to the city. I'd eventually go to seminary in like 10 minutes away from where I quit my job. But we flew into Columbus. I went to the corporate office we met at that morning, and I handed my team lead my 2 weeks notice resignation letter. And then we all got a bunch of cars and drove over to the place where we were having a big client meeting all week long, like 50 or 60 client people. So the meeting gets going in the morning. We have a break in the meeting for like 10 minutes to just go to the bathroom and grab something to drink. We're standing in the lobby, and my team lead walks up to me and says, you need to go home. And I said, I need to go home. And he said, yeah, the partner doesn't want you around on the project running up expenses anymore. You need to go home. And I was like, look, right now go home? And he's like, yes, right now go home. So now I have like 2.5 minutes to say goodbye to some dear people that I have worked with for a long time, because the meeting's getting ready to start, and I got to figure out now that I got to go home, and I don't have a car, so I'm trying to figure all that out. Well, then on my way home, I'm like, great. I gave him 2 weeks notice. I'll get paid for 2 weeks to hang out with my new baby that I haven't seen in 5 months. So I got home, and we had to charge all of our hours to places. So I called HR, and the HR person said, oh no, if your project doesn't want you, you're terminated immediately. Now what that meant for us in that day was that we were going to go a month without insurance and like 3 weeks without getting paid. And we would have gotten through all that, but we were a young couple with a brand new baby, and it was scary. And all of this I share with you because I felt like I did everything by the book. The project was well within the rules to tell me they didn't need me anymore. And HR was well within the book and the rules to tell me I was terminated immediately. Our lives are not lived in the simple rules of this is right and this is wrong, or this is okay and this is not, or this is all of those like easy lines we draw. Most of our lives aren't lived in that space. They're lived in gray area. Gray area where I felt like I did everything right, where the partner did everything by the book, where the HR did everything by the book. Now, you could look in there and see, why did the partner do what he did? He was trying to look out for expenses and watch his bottom line, and that's beneficial to him. Not so much for me. HR, same thing. They've got their rules. They have to follow those, and it's good for them if they keep me out of the place instead of running up expenses for a while. And if I'm honest, right, I was looking out for me and for my kid and my wife and all of that, but all of that was my own sense of wanting the rules to work in my favor. And so as we go from day to day, whether we're an accountant that has all kinds of rules you follow, or teachers that have ways you ought to behave with kids, or if you're retired and you're out volunteering, or whatever it is we do, it is easy for us to land in those spaces of gray area where we're not sure what to do and where our choices can impact other people for the negative, especially when we look for rules to justify what we do. Now, Jesus was the recipient of things done by the rules. If you follow the gospel narrative, when it gets towards the end, they trot him out to all the places where the rules are enforced. They take him to the governor. They take him to the religious leaders. They send him back over to Pilate again. They go through all of this so that by the book they can execute him. And that's what ends up happening. And yet it's in that space that Jesus takes all of those rules and puts us first. And that's what God does in the resurrection, is put us first, ahead of all of the brokenness, ahead of all the walls and boundaries we can build, ahead of all the rules and customs and anything that gets in the way of us being whole and well. God gives us resurrection life to make us new and put us first in those places. And that means that the story today is really an invitation for us into a way of living. It's kind of a guide and a model for living that puts people first ahead of rules. Sometimes that does mean following rules, and other times it means really focusing on those people that are in front of us and figuring out the way to best serve them. Now, that's not easy. If you're an accountant that does audits or works in businesses, there are general accounting rules and whatever that have to be followed. But it's how you interact with the people that makes a difference, right? There are unpleasant jobs in this world that have to get done, and I would much rather have a faithful person in those jobs, trying to figure out how to put people first, not just following the letter of the law and making sure that all the rules are followed. As I got off the phone with that HR person, I spent a good long time arguing, saying I did exactly what I was supposed to do, and now I'm getting punished for it by getting left out here to dry. Now understand that I made this company a lot of money, I think, in my time there. If I remember correctly, my final bill rate was well over $200 an hour that they billed in my time, which means they made a lot of money from me. And here, after them making a lot of money from all of my work, I felt like I was just kind of getting left out there. So they said, well, we'll see what we can do. It took about a week. By the end of that first week, they called and said, we found that we can fly to D.C. for a couple of weeks, and we'll keep you busy there, and we'll try to get that worked out. Well, while I was waiting for them to come back, I called a new company, who I've never done anything for. I've never made them any money. I actually spent my first 6 weeks there sitting in the office because they didn't have a project for me to go to yet, so I was just costing them money that they probably knew was going to happen. I called them and said, is there any chance you could move my start date up by like just a few days? And what that meant for me was still some time without pay, but insurance all the way through and all. And they just said, yeah, we can do that. And I shared that bit of it with you because that is how God's grace works. I had done nothing for them. I had done nothing to earn it, nothing to be in that space where they could look out for me and take care of me and make space for me and my family to be well, and yet they did that. The place that I had done so much for couldn't really get their mind around that right away because there was rules and rules and rules. But the place that I had not been did that for me. And that's how God's grace works. We don't have to get up every day and do everything right for God to love us and make us whole. We don't have to be healthy. We don't have to be well. We don't have to be following all of some religious rules to make sure that God is with us and understands us. The grace comes first. Every day. We talk about these waters of baptism. We start every day with God's grace. And that is what comes first to us so that we then can walk in that grace and put people first because God has put us first. So in this story, we get this pattern of living. It's not easy, but it doesn't have to be because Jesus is the one that works through us to make us well, to give us grace so that we can share that with people that deeply need it out in the world. Amen.